look who's joining us. Back with us now, Congressman Byron Donalds from House Oversight. What a day, Congressman. It's good to see you. Can we first talk about what is going on with the targeting of the probes in the House? What is going to be handled first? Is it going to be the Biden family, or is it going to be how the government handled the pandemic or the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan? Which comes first?
Well, look, to be honest with you, first of all, it's good to be back with you.
Same here.
Now, to what we're going to cover it all. The thing about House Republicans is we know how to walk and chew gum at the same time. I want to make sure the American people understand that while we're going to have these investigations into Joe Biden and all of the business and the business schemes and the pay-for-play schemes that might be going around his administration, we're going to take care of the other stuff as well. So I want to make sure people understand that we're not going to leave that stuff off the table. But the reason why this is mission critical is because Joe Biden's energy policies in particular, but his economic policies overall, in our viewpoint, actually favor the Chinese government. And when you bring into play the business dealings of Hunter Biden and his brother Jim Biden, it paints a terrible picture for the United States and a picture of influence that goes all the way to the top.
I mean, the allegations are wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The allegations are serious that the House GOP is alleging about the Biden family. So it's also based on bank records that, that they're pulling out of the Treasury Department. And they're saying the Biden White House, the Treasury Department, is blocking those suspicious activity reports on those transactions and more. What's happening here?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. And let me expound upon this. Congress used to have full access to these SARS reports that banking institutions create. They're called suspicious activity reports. Most people in their entire lifetime may never trigger one SAR report. Hunter Biden is involved in at least 150. So under the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration, Congress had access to these reports. When Joe Biden became president of the United States, he changed the rules so Congress could not see these reports anymore. I don't know what that sounds like to you, but that sounds fishy. So what we're going to do is to dig into that and many more things wherever the investigation takes us.
Talk to us about the energy deals. We've been covering this with Congressman Comer. They were working on a scheme to get China to basically buy liquefied natural gas, to help China do that, to buy those nat gas reserves out of U.S. states, and helping China buy one of the largest cobalt mines in Africa. That's what Hunter Biden was allegedly doing. That seems like serious stuff.
No, it's incredibly serious. Listen, anybody who subscribes to the Green New Deal, you have to understand you need cobalt to make batteries and to make solar panels. China dominates cobalt mining across the globe. The New York Times reported a couple of years ago that Hunter Biden was intimately involved with the sale of a cobalt mine in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to a Chinese firm. Hunter Biden was doing this, and he has no expertise. Now we're finding out that he was also involved with giving background information and getting data on potential sales of liquefied natural gas mines for Chinese companies at the same time that Joe Biden is trying to shift the energy matrix in the United States to batteries and solar panels. This reeks of collusion, but what House Republicans are going to do is investigate and let the evidence speak for themselves.
Let's listen to Congressman Jim Jordan today. He's talking about the politicization of the Justice Department when it comes to the Hunter Biden and the Biden family story. Watch this.
They suppressed information about the Hunter Biden story. 2022, they raided the president's home 91 days before an election. Maybe it'd be nice if the FBI and the Justice Department just stayed out of it and let we the people decide who we think should represent us, who we think should lead us. That's supposed to be how America works. So this is the focus on the Judiciary Committee, the political nature at the Justice Department, and the linkage now to what was happening with the Hunter Biden story.
So, the details that we're seeing, Congressman, I just want to hit this, that while the Vice President Biden was leading Ukraine policy for the Obama White House, Hunter Biden, worked in Ukraine at that energy company, Burisma, sat on the board. There's evidence also that Hunter Biden simultaneously courted and was trying to get business in Russia, and that in the wake of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, the United States sanctioned Russian oligarchs but not those who sent money to Hunter Biden and the Biden family.
Now, all of what you said is absolutely correct, which is why it's important for us to get to the bottom of this. We are actually facing many crises here in the United States. Number one, there are foreign policy issues that are flanking us across the globe that are serious. Number two, we have an energy problem here in the United States. We know about the diesel shortage that's coming. One of the issues with diesel is that you need an additive. Most of that additive is actually made in Russia. That's a serious issue, along with everything else going on with inflation. Okay. So our job is to hold the administration accountable. If there's nothing to see there, then the administration should have nothing to hide. But what we've seen is that the administration has put up blockade after blockade for us to get the information that Congress needs for real oversight.
Yeah, so Jim Jordan and Congressman Comer sent letters to the FBI director, Treasury Secretary Yellen, National Archives. It looks like Hunter Biden's former business partner, even his former, or rather investment manager. Let's talk about these other hearings. We're also looking at trying to ascertain what the GOP is going to be, what's coming up first. So, Congressman, to your point, inflation, government spending, fueling record inflation, the fallout of the left's policies. You see, week on crime, Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner just got impeached by the State House in Pennsylvania. California is projecting a $25 billion budget hole. It blew that out as businesses and people flee the state. When you consider the lay of the land across the nation and what you think is most important that they need to hear now about what was going on and is going on in the Biden administration, again, what's going to be teed up first?
Well, obviously, we talked enough about the Biden family, but what's also coming is investigations into the Department of Justice and into the FBI. Right now, we have about 14 whistleblowers, and that list is actually growing, of people who work in these agencies who are very concerned about the politicization of those agencies. And that speaks to the very core of our system of government. But then there's going to be other things we have to get into. Obviously, what's going on with Afghanistan, the fallout there, what's happening in Ukraine, the $83 billion plus that the American people have sent over there. We need to have oversight of those dollars. And last but not least, we're going to have to get into border security. We heard the stories last week about Alejandro Mayorkas trying to force out the commissioner on Border Patrol because they have failed the American people when it comes to border security, and there's going to be much, much more. Don't forget about them suppressing articles and suppressing stories that will actually favor the Democrats. A lot of stuff needs to be investigated.
Possible impeachment?
Right now, I'm going to tell everybody crystal clear, we're going to let the evidence take us to its natural conclusion. We're not going to act like the Democrats.
Of Biden team officials, that's, on the possibly coming up. Okay, Congressman Donalds, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.